This video is going to be an extension of my previous video called Symbols of Power and Monarch Symbolism. So if you haven't seen that one yet, I highly recommend you go back and check that one out so that way you have a foundation of understanding for the content that I'm going to be covering in this video series. I'm also going to compile some of my several previous articles that I've done, as well as new information that I haven't released regarding what I like to call as above, so below the belt. The principle of how the anatomy of the human brain, as well as some of the glands within the human brain, directly correspond both geometrically and linguistically with the sexual organs and the sexual regions. Hence the pun, as above, so below the belt. So to start off, what we're seeing here is I saw this image. It immediately clicked in my mind as something majorly important to my monarch symbolism video, as well as monarch mind control symbolism. But what we're looking at is a cross image of the human brain during a CT scan. And as we can see here directly in the center, what makes this image so significant and so symbolic is what we're seeing is literally the monarch mind control. We are literally seeing why it is called monarch mind control. And again, you don't understand this, go back and see my previous video called Symbols of Power, discussing the elements in the symbols and the anatomy, the physiology of monarch mind control. So what we're seeing here in the center, what actually makes up the body of the monarch within the human brain, is called the first and second ventricle, which is the hippocampus of the human brain. It's the optic thalamus region. And the hippocampus is what we call Amun's horn. And that is what the first and second ventricle are. They make up the two wings of the monarch butterfly. And what would be the abdomen of the butterfly down below is what's called the third ventricle, which is also called a fornix, which means in etymology, the fornix means a vaulted chamber. And it's called a fornix or a vaulted chamber because, as we can see, the geometry here makes up an archway or a vault. It is the vault of heaven. The vault of heaven corresponding to the human skull, and the third ventricle or the fornix inside the brain, which is the vault of heaven corresponding to ancient Egyptian cosmology. And again, I mentioned that the fornix is called the fornix because it means an archway. And here we're looking at the Freemasonic, the Royal Arch. And later on in the video, I will tie this in as to why it's royal. Because here in just a minute, I'm going to point out to you why the
the innermost chamber of the brain, if you overlay the Great Pyramid on top of the brain, the king's and queen's chamber of the Great Pyramid corresponds exactly to the innermost chamber of the human skull, which is the thalamus and the optic thalamus region where the pineal gland sits. So again, that's why it's called the king's queen's chamber. And this is why it's located why it's the royal arch. And again, later on in the video, I'll explain more about why it's royal and how it relates to the royalty, to the pharaoh, the king cobra, the king serpent, the basilisk, which means king serpent, which again refers to royalty. So I'll cover that in depth again later on throughout the video. But again, regarding this image that we're looking at right here, relating to the vault of heaven, the cranial vault, which, as I failed to mention in my last video, which is why this is a continuation of it, is the sphenoid bone. As I mentioned in the last video, it's the keystone of the human skull, meaning that in masonry, the keystone of the arch is this stone right here, which is the key. That's the stone that holds the arch in place. It's what supports the entire structure, locks it all into place, holds it in support. And this is the finishing stone that is placed in the archway, and that's what gives it support. So in the human skull, the sphenoid bone is the keystone, and the sphenoid bone is what supports the most crucial glands, which would be the pituitary. And so again, that's why it supports the archway of the cranial vault. And again, what we're looking at here is this is the Royal Arch Freemasonry. You have the left and the right pillars, the twin pillars, as I'm about to mention here in just a second, which are the left and the right hemisphere, the sun and the moon. The left and right hemispheres, which also correspond to the first and second ventricle of the human brain, the twin pillars, the twin towers, the twin pillars of the sun and the moon. And what we're looking at here is the horizon. We're looking at the axis of the zodiac wheel. So this is Aries here, which is the first. It's the first, and Taurus. So then Taurus would be the last, as if you're completing the circle. So Aries is the first. It's springtime. It's the beginning. It's the alpha. And so, or if you, according to processional slippage, you know, the Taurus would be the alpha, depending on the age, the zodiacal age that you're in. But again, this is the first, and right over here, so this is where the sun rises in the east, at Aries. And then the sun sets over here at Libra. So this is where the sun hits the horizon and goes down into the underworld of the year, the winter months of the year. So the sun sets here, which is where it dies. And when we die, the heart is judged on this, weighed on the scales of judgment, this is Libra. It's the scales which weighs the heart at the death of the season, at the death of the sun, when it goes to the underworld, which again goes back to Egyptian cosmology. So that's what we're looking at here. And I mean, I could go through all of this, but that's not relevant to the video that I'm making. That's not relevant to the concept. Although here you have the cornucopia representing the abundance, but it's also, notice, it's the horn, as we were just referring to, Amun's horn, the hippocampus. And here you have the 7 stars, the Pleiades. So, but again, that's irrelevant to the video that I'm making. So, but also notice this later on. Notice the caduceus wrap up the pole. We're going to talk about that later on. The snake in the pole, the phallic pillar, and the serpent. So again, we'll cover that later on. But again, and also I forgot to mention this, the keystone is the sign of Cancer. So again, this is where the sun rises. This is the sun at its peak at high noon. But in the season, it's the summer solstice, when the sun is at its peak, or the longest days of summer. So this is the height of the sun, and this is the death of the sun. Sunrise, sunset, when Set kills Horus, when Set overthrows Horus.
And the third ventricle is where the pineal gland is located, as well as the pituitary gland. And the pineal gland is obviously what we know as the third eye. So this third ventricle here is where we find the third eye, the third ventricle, the third eye, the vaulted chamber. And this is vaulted chamber, the fornix, is what if we place the image of the Great Pyramid directly over the human skull, and line it up geometrically, this vaulted chamber, this third eye, this third ventricle, this fornix chamber, directly corresponds to what's called the King's and Queen's chamber within the Great Pyramid of Egypt, of Giza. And so it's also what corresponds in biblical theology as Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber. And this monarch image here, the hypothalamus, the optic thalamus region, is also what is, or the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, meaning an archway, as in the fornix, the vaulted chamber, the vault of heaven. The two wings of this monarch, the two wings correspond to the two cherubim, which guard the Ark of the Covenant, which are two sphinxes, whose wings are touching. And the etymology of the word fornix comes from fornis, which means furnace. And in this case, we're referring to where the eternal flame burns, the light of the mind, the pineal gland, the light of human consciousness, which is a photoreceptor. And again, go back to see my series called Symbols of Power to discuss the essence of light and the pineal gland being a photoreceptor. In other words, a receiver of light, which controls the human circadian rhythms, the regulation of sleep and consciousness. So inside the fornix, or the furnace, where the eternal flame burns, in Freemasonry it's known as the eternal flame. Just like the Olympic torch is lit and is kept burning throughout the entire games, which represents the eternal flame, the torch carried through the underworld of mythology, which is the light of consciousness. It's the light that is never extinguished. The light of consciousness, the enlightenment, the light of the mind. Enlightenment means light within the mind.
Yeah, it's like the the candle is the sacred flame. It's the keeping of the sacred flame.
The spirit.
The spirit. Which is why, in like the Olympics, you have to keep, and in Masonry they keep the torch lit, they keep the flame, the sacred fire burning, and obviously that's the spirit. It's the spirit it's the flame, it's the spark of life.
It's the burning light. It's the flame.
It's as David Bowie's Black Star song refers to as the solitary candle.
In the villa of all men, in the villa of all men, stands a solitary candle. At the center of it all, at the center of it all, you are mine.
The mind's eye, the third eye, lies directly in the center of the human skull. The pineal is sensitive to light and generates its own source of perceptual light as dimethyltryptamine. It's known as the seat of the soul and the receptor of consciousness. It is the receiver of sight beyond sight.
The Eye of Thundera, a Thundercat's in danger.
The wavelength beyond the visible light spectrum of far infrared to ultraviolet. Your spiritual eyes the eyes that you used to see when dreaming, the eyes that see in the dark when you sleep, the solitary candle that burns throughout the night. It is said, if thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light.
And notice how it's called the Villa of Ormond, which, when he says it in his English accent, sounds exactly similar to the Villa of Amen, which, as I've covered in one of my previous articles, the Villa of Amen of the human skull, the foramen being a hole where the nerves pass through. So it's the chamber of Amen, the solitary candle, the eternal flame, the light within the mind, the torch that bears through the underworld, the torch that is lit to carry through the underworld, to guide the passage through the underworld, to guide the way through death and into rebirth and eternal life. And the word fornix is where we get the word fornication, because the fornix was also referred to as a vaulted chamber. In other words, it was linked and related etymologically to a brothel, or in other words, a place where you go for fornication. But in ancient times, which was known as sacred sexuality or sacred prostitution. Because sexuality and human sexuality is a vital part of life. It's a vital part of human well-being. Everyone has sexual needs that need to be met, and in ancient times, this was referred to as sacred prostitution because it was the oldest profession, the oldest service offered to people in order to relieve their physical ailments, to relieve their psychic traumas. Because all trauma, as Wilhelm Reich points out in his Sciences, all trauma roots and stems from sexual repression of the sexual energy. And through healthily circulating sexual energy is what promotes well-being and health and vital life force, vitality.
Having good sex often has so many health benefits that it's staggering, but it's no surprise. The most important, often missing component is the intimacy, or the spiritual recognition or recognition of your deepest aspect inside another. Oxytocin is the social bonding hormone produced in the hypothalamus but released by the pituitary gland during physical intimacy such as hugging, kissing, and cuddling. And the longer the duration of the cuddling or the kissing or the physical contact, the higher amount of the intimacy, the higher amount of oxytocin is released into the body, and therefore the greater social bonding. The crucial effect of regular sex is hormone production, releasing a slew of chemical compounds such as endorphins, the compound word of endo and orphan, which literally means endogenous morphine. In other words, morphine generated endogenously, which means within the body, generated from within. And endorphins are named after the Greek god Morpheus, who is the deity, the god of dreams, which is why sex also improves sleep and circadian rhythms. And these hormone productions improve circadian rhythms. It strengthens libido, it reduces cortisol, or the stress hormones. It calms the nervous system, lowers systolic blood pressure, cuts the risk of heart attacks, improves cardiovascular circulation, lubrication, elasticity of the tissues of the vagina, and strengthens the muscles.
However, there's also the likely case that male DNA from past sexual partners has been found in the female brain, which stays there throughout their entire lifespan. This is known as microchimerism. So ponder that for a minute. But you also have to realize, as most people won't tell you, that it likely only happens with internal fluid transfer. And they also won't tell you that still so much research needs to be done to confirm this. But it could mean that you literally carry a piece of your sexual partners in your brain for your entire life, if you're a female, literally leaving an imprint on them. But the thing is that DNA is both a receiver and a transmitter of patterns, and demonstrably communicates non-locally via longitudinal waves. So in other words, which most people will mistakenly and fallaciously call quantum entanglement. But this is actually an electrical effect, which is faster than the speed of light. It happens instantly, and this has been proven in multiple experiments. In DNA across the country will actually respond simultaneously to stimuli, DNA from the same samples, and this happens longitudinally through what would be called longitudinal waves, or sometimes also scalar waves. This means you could either imprint onto the characteristic expression of your past partners, as well as vice versa. They can imprint onto your characteristic expression. So basically the lesson here is know thyself and heal your personal karma, and therefore you imprint that characteristic onto the expression of all of your past partners, and rather them having their expression imprinted upon your behaviors, your thoughts, and your actions. So this is why self-work is the most crucial aspect of an individual. So this vault, this arched chamber, this arch of heaven is also where we, linked to Freemasonry, is where we get the arch. And at the direct center of that arch, the most crucial component of the arch is the key, what's known as the keystone. And this next image that we'll take a look at is created to illustrate that the pons, which connects to the optic thalamus in the human brain, identically corresponds to the ancient hieroglyphic depictions of the deity called Ptah, or Ta, if you use the silent P, Pitta, which was phonetically pronounced Pitta, and I'll portray how it's more than just iconography and images or images that connect Ptah as the ophthalmos. In Egyptian mythology, Ptah, vocalized again as Pitta in ancient Egyptian, is the demiurge of Memphis, the god of creation, the arts, fertility, and craftsmanship. He is considered the demiurge who existed before all other things, and by his willfulness thought the world into existence. It was first conceived by thought and realized by the word. Pitta conceives the world by thought of his heart and gives life through the magic of his word. That which Pitta commanded was created, with which the constituents of nature, fauna, and flora are contained. A document known as the Memphite Theology shows the god Pitta responsible for creation of the universe by thought and by the word. And it's funny how this directly links to the Genesis creation story, long predating the Genesis creation story. The demiurge is from Latinized Greek demiurgos, literally public or skilled worker, the deity of craftsmanship, artisan. Demiurgos comes from demos, meaning common people. See demotic plus orgos, meaning the root word ergos, meaning work, which is linked to the etymology of the word organ. So the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are both organs, which does work. Hence the word ergos, as in demiurgos, or a small organ, which does work. So the pituitary gland is also linked to pitta, pituitary, pitta, a small organ which does work. This is an excerpt from Antoine Gigol's Crown and the Hero of the Sea. All this is leading us to the rudimentary eye in the human brain. The pitta linked to the word ophthalmos. Ophthalmos is ancient Greek meaning eye, as in the all-seeing eye, the pineal gland. The pitta that Iamblichus is writing about in his book De Mysteris Egyptorium, as the creative intellect, the Lord of the truth and knowledge, the pitta who will become pitta. All the past and all the secrets are in the words and the sounds. A long journey from the origins for the most sacred artifact of Egypt. The word ophthalmos, secularly described as being from the root words ops, meaning eye, see optic. A form related to thalamus, meaning inner room or chamber, or in other words, the third ventricle, the innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies. So ophthalmos, meaning eye, is a compound word composing of eye and thalamus, meaning inner room chamber of the inner eye. And I've gotten into arguments with Stephen Bankers of Spirit Science and Metaphysics website over all this theology and the etymology. He claims that ophthalmos can't possibly be talking about the pineal gland, can't possibly be referring to the third eye, and it simply is used in the context regarding the external eyes. But that is not true at all, and I will prove that through the etymology. See, again, they say that it comes from the word ops, meaning eye, plus thalamus. They would have you believe that ophthalmos is a compound word of ops plus thalamus, but that's not the case at all. The prefix of the word-forming element ophi, O-P-H-I, however, refers to a serpent or snake. So look at the word again. It's ophthalmos, not ophthalmos. From the point of view of biological evolution, the pineal gland represents a kind of atrophied photoreceptor, which means a receiver of light. In the epithalamus of some species of amphibians and reptiles, such as snakes, it's linked to a vestigial organ known as the parietal eye. A parietal eye, also known as a third eye or pineal eye, is photoreceptive, meaning receptive to light. It's a receiver of light, and it's sensitive to light, and it emits its own light, and is associated with the pineal gland, regulating circadian rhythmicity, sleep and wake cycle, and hormone production for thermal regulation, body temperature regulation. The very fact that thalamus alone means inner chamber is a dead giveaway that it's referring to the third eye, the Holy of Holies, as it corresponds to Solomon's temple, the third ventricle of the human brain, which is direct midline between the left and right ventricles, or the twin, which are known as the twin pillars. So it's the third pillar of Freemasonry, which stands directly between the two pillars of the sun and the moon, the left and the right hemispheres, the left and the right ventricle, the twin pillars, of which the third pillar stands directly in the center, hence the third eye and the third ventricle. So refer to this amulet of King Tutankhamun's tomb, the amulet of the Uraeus serpent, where the Uraeus symbol was made to represent the goddess Wadjet, which was the ancient Egyptian serpent goddess. It was a serpent deity. And what this amulet is depicting with the Uraeus is it's depicting snake eyes.
Snakes have sight beyond sight because they can see in the infrared spectrum. So in other words, they have heat vision. They can sense infrared heat. So they have thermal vision. So they can see beyond the typical spectrum of visible light that humans can see. So they have the sight beyond sight. And they sense this heat around them by taking in, they smell through their tongue, but they also send information into the heat sensing membranes, which allows them to have the thermal vision. And these two cones, or these cones of vision, overlap directly at the center, leaving a perfectly visible Vesica Pisces geometry visual pattern.
the eye of the snake, the third eye, the all-seeing eye, the parietal eye, a vestigial remnant of the reptilian anatomy, the reptilian physiology, which the human brain is segmented into three main segments. You have the pons, or in other words, the brain stem, which regards to survival and direct basic needs, and then you have the midbrain, which relates to emotions, and which is the mammalian brain, which relates to emotions and temperature regulation and hormone production. And then you have the newest development of the brain, which is the neocortex, which is related to higher thinking and higher cognitive abilities, rational functioning, problem solving. So the reptilian portion of the brain is referring to the most basic urges of human nature, which is survival and the basic needs of human survival. Again, the inner eye, the third eye, as everyone knows by now, the pineal gland, is regulated by the Kundalini serpent energy of the body's central nervous ganglia. In other words, gangs or networks of glial cells, of glia, which are neural cells, which represents enlightenment, or in other words, light within the mind. The serpent energy represents life, rebirth, fertility, divinity, and royalty, as shown by the basilisk, which means king serpent, which comes from the root word of basil, which means king or royalty, basil or basil, king or royalty, which is exactly why the king pharaohs wore the uraeus cobra, or in other words, the king cobra on the third eye, which just so happens that the pons, the brainstem, and the thalamus portion of the inner brain is known as the reptilian complex, which corresponds to the very base of animal functioning, the basic animal nature, or in other words, the base, which means the very base of the human brain, the bottommost segment of the human brain, which relates directly to survival and instinct, which is why it's called the basal ganglia, or the basal ganglia. Literally means the base of the brain. It's the most basic ganglia of the human brain, which is why the base of the brain, or the basal ganglia, looks exactly like a hooded cobra standing on its tail, standing erect. Exactly like the uraeus cobra on the pharaoh's third eye, stands erect, which is a direct representation of the pons. It's a direct representation of the reptilian complex of the human brain. It's a direct representation of royalty, of the king's chamber, of the third ventricle, the serpent, the snake eye. The pineal gland is the only midline brain structure that is unpaired or azygous. It's not directly bisymmetrical, and it takes its name from its pine cone shape, which follows a perfect golden ratio Fibonacci hypertrochoid pattern. Which is the fundamental basis of magnetism and every form of function in this universe. The serpent in the tree of knowledge represents the Kundalini energy rising up the spine, which is known as Jacob's ladder.
have 200 or so bones, but we only have one bone that is considered the holy bone, the sacrum. However, all bones are holy. All bones are also full of holes, or holy, which in medical terms are called foramen. They are foramen. The word sacrum means sacred in Latin, and it lives on in English anatomy as the name for the large heavy bone at the base of the spine, which is the sacrum, also called the spade. The Romans called the bone the os sacrum, which literally meant the holy bone, and the Greeks termed it iron ostion, the same thing, the holy bone. Several schools of thought exist as to what makes this bone so sacred, including the following. Temple, in Greek, airon, meant not only sacred but also a holy place or a temple. Hiero, as in hieroglyphics, which means holy symbols, which means sacred writing, sacred images, sacred glyphs. So again, in Greek, hieron meant not only sacred but a holy place or a temple. It was the holy place in the sense that within its bony cavity lies the female ovaries and uterus, thus her sacred organs of procreation, her holy of holies. Thanks to its great size, the sacrum is usually the last bone of a buried body to rot. The ancients thus may have believed the sacrum to be the focal point around which the body could be reassembled in afterlife. The sacrum as a sacred sacrifice, or a sacrificial vessel. Some archaeological evidence supports the use of the sacrum as vessel to hold the sacrifice in ancient sacred or sacred rites. Supposedly the sacrum was the part of an animal offered in sacrifice, since the sacrum is the seat of the organs of procreation. But whatever the exact explanation, the sacrum was surely sacred to the ancients. It was the holy bone, as its name reveals even today. Thus, from the base of the spine, we have the most basic animal instinct, the most basic nature, which also gives us the terms like sacred. In metaphysics, the sacral is the root of the basis for survival, sex, security, and instinctual needs, which is the basis for metaphorical need to sacrifice this portion in order to move to a more advanced state of being. However, like anything else, these things go to shit at the height of ignorance when people take things literally, such as things like literal ritual sacrifice of flesh and blood offerings to some deity. The Ace of Spades. Manly P. Hall had said the spade is actually related to our anatomy being that of our spinal column and the sacrum bone. This will all start to make sense once you realize that the highest exoteric degree in Freemasonry is the 33rd degree. There are 33 turns in a complete sequence of human DNA, and the human vertebral column usually consists of 33 vertebrae. The sacrum is a large triangular bone that looks very similar to the symbol of the spade. It's located at both the base of the spine between our two hip bones with the coccyx or tailbone, and also at the top of our spine, which connects to the last lumbar vertebrae in its lower part. The sacrum bone normally forms from 5 unfused vertebrae at birth, and they begin to fuse together between approximate ages of 16 to 18 years old. And by the age of 33 to 34 years, it fuses into one bone that looks just like a spade.
I've covered all of this in extreme depth in my PDF file called Secrets of All Religions, which has gone way deeper than I intend to go in this video. And at some point I intend to make a complete comprehensive video compiling all of that information into video format, but that's going to require it's going to take a long time. It's going to require a lot of work and a lot of editing to compile that video together. So I just haven't done that yet. Instead, I'm releasing it in many different segments throughout these video series in separate components. But again, the serpent in the tree of knowledge represents Kundalini energy rising up the spine, which is known as Jacob's ladder, or the tree, as well as the human DNA, or DNA in itself, which is known as the tree of life. which corresponds directly geometrically to other mathematical formulas and Fibonacci sequence in nature, which is what trees follow as well. So in other words, other trees as being the tree of life, in other words, fruit trees being the tree of life as well, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so obviously having knowledge means you have knowledge of both good and evil. This is not bad, this is not something negative, this is not something evil, some religious concept. This is simply having wisdom and knowledge of knowing whether to use that knowledge and apply wisdom to it to do good, or to use that knowledge to do evil. So it can be used either way, but either way, knowledge is power, and knowledge is the key. You cannot achieve good or evil without having knowledge and without having wisdom. So that is the essence of the tree of knowledge and of good and evil. And all of these ancient depictions of archetypes trampling the serpent, or standing on snakes, or wrestling or grasping or wrestling with snakes or wrestling with serpents, slaying the dragon, simply represents having control over your kundalini, your sexual energy. It means being the master of your own energy.
Remember, walk without rhythm, and we won't attract the worm.
Prequel, 1,000 lawyers buried up to their neck in sand. What? No sand?
The Sand Snakes are with me. He told me he smuggled Jamie Lannister into Dorne.
Who's that?
Jamie fucking Lannister.
Only one God can save us, but not without his eyes.
Uncle Jamie?
That's a storm. Sets hunters riding for patches. We should run! Run? We mortals do it all the time!
Ages have passed since the gods walked among us.
Get off the snake with a swarm of motor. Get off the snake under the totem.
Sugar, do we have worm sign?
Close your eyes. See the snake.
Moses. Oh!
Kiss this here. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. If we kiss it without fear, it'll take us through the garden.
Is it a dream where you see yourself standing in sort of sun god robes on a pyramid with 1,000 naked women?
Ride the snake.
We have one sign the likes of which even God has never seen.
Then you shouldn't be afraid to ride. Ride the snake.
Hello and welcome to the $100,000 pyramid, our guest. Can't you feel the darkness?
I'm the light. I'm the light of the snake.
Either that or it's just a big ugly eye and I hate it.
Only one God save us, but not without his eye.
Through the all-seeing eye.
Snake eyes! You got snake eyes!
A snakeskin jacket!
I found it! Him! Then!
It's a third-degree master mason of the Blue Line.
Hey!
These are all archetypal, allegorical, deeply symbolic messages, deeply symbolic stories being told over time. So this is not about simply something being good or evil. It's about having the knowledge of the human physiology, the knowledge of the spiritual technology, and the knowledge of nature, and the wisdom and of the patterns of nature and the functions of life, in order to either do good with that or to use that in order to hide that away, to stash that away, to hide it, to keep it for yourself in order to do evil over other beings, to hold that knowledge and to either do good or evil with it. That's simply all it is right there. The snake in ancient mythology, symbology, and theology is associated or recognized with the female goddess. As well as with the male aspect as well. The snake is a symbol of both the male penis, the male phallic energy, as well as the female energy. And this is the archetypal serpent goddess. This is why we always find the archetypal dragon queen or the drag queen, which is exactly why the drag queens of Hollywood and its magical druidic order always show you the dragon queen, the mother of dragons. The serpent goddess represents the Kundalini energy. The Kundalini energy comes from the etymology of kunda, which comes from kunta, kunt, kunt. The etymology of kunt, meaning goddess, queen. the only word representing the entire female genitalia, and not just one specific aspect of it. So Kundalini comes from kunt, as well as lini, line, ling, lingam, which all refers to the phallic line, the phallic, the pillar, the lingam, the line. The linguini, the lingerie, which are the thin strings, the thin line, the straight line, the phallic line. The lingam, which is the linguistics, the tongue. How the tongue relates is directly linked to the lingam, which is the penis, which I will cover further on as we get deeper into the anatomy of as above, so below the belt, relating to how what is above the belt is directly a representation and a reflection of what is below the belt, as far as glands and organs are concerned, and physiology. So kunt comes from female genitalia. Old Norse kunta, Old Frisian, Middle Dutch, and Middle Low German kunta, from Proto-Germanic kuntun, a link to Latin cuneus, meaning wedge, as in cuneiform, which was a language using specific wedge shapes to create the alphabet. As it's no mystery that the female vagina is known as the wedge. It's the female delta. It is the downward-facing pyramid, the female delta. Tradition said the triangle was the primordial image of the female triangle of life. It was known as the Kali Yantra, representing Kali as Kunti, or as the Yoni Yantra, or the sign of the vulva. In Egypt, the triangle was a hieroglyphic sign for woman, and it carried the same meaning among the gypsies, who brought it from their original home in Hindustan. In the Greek sacred alphabet, the delta, or the triangle, stood for the holy door, the vulva of the all-mother Demeter. Most ancient symbol systems recognize the triangle as a sign of the goddess's virgin mother crone, Trinity, and at the same time as her genital holy place, the source of all life. The triangle represented the virgin moon goddess called Men Nefer, the archaic deity of the first mother city of Memphis, of Egypt. The triangle everywhere connected with the female trinity and a frequent component of monograms of the goddesses. To the Gnostics, the triangle signified creative intellect. The Sinai Peninsula, which is known as the Fertile Crescent, the female's fertile crescent. Cuneus, meaning wedge, from Proto-Indo-European root gu, meaning hollow place, as in hollow hole or vagina. From Proto-Indo-European gwen, which is the root of the word queen, related to Greek gyna, meaning woman, hence gynecology, the study of the woman, of female anatomy.
And you are Gina?
Gina. Hey, what's up?
Nothing.
Look, I'm gonna be real honest with you. It's been a long time since I've been with a man. Spent a lot of time with the ladies. Looking to get back up on that pogo stick, you know what I'm saying?
So when we look up the etymology of the word Gina, or Gina, the name Gina, it brings us to yawn, the open wide mouth, the yawn, her gape. From Jin, Old Norse Gina, to yawn. Proto-Indo-European guy or gay, to yawn, gape, to gape, the yawn, to gape, be ajar. So this is why we're talking about her yawnin, her yoni, the yoni, the yawn, the open mouth, the gape, her gina. So the origins of the word cunt directly relate to the female goddess, her queenhood, the goddesshood, the goddess aspect. It is not something derogatory. Anytime you use the word cunt, it is held in the highest, most sacred aspect. The snake has always been the symbol of fertility, rebirth, and renewal, shedding of the old skin of the old self and being reborn into your new skin. The snake emerges from its den, or its dark, dank hole in the ground. The underworld. All life, everything in nature and everything in this universe emerges from the darkness, aka the black hole, which is a vaginal innuendo. As far as physics is concerned, this is nothing other than simply sexual innuendo regarding the physics of things like black holes, the anatomy of as above, so below, the belt. We're referring to the underworld, the abyss, the dark hole, the primordial waters of the goddess. This is why the snake represents sex and fertility, because it enters in and out of the hole, of the nether regions, where it resides, in the ground, as well as in anatomy. The male serpent resides in the female hole, the female cave. Darkness represents or represents the feminine nature, because the goddess is negative in nature, and negative not as in bad, just simply negative polarity, as in two polarities, and the female is the negative aspect, the negative polarity, where the male is the positive. Electricity, you have an outlet, a male and a female outlet. The male deposits the inserts into the female outlet. Thus her organs are inward. Her energy contracts. Her sexual energy is contracting. It is centripetal, meaning it sucks within, it sucks into. This is directly relating to physics and magnetism. In physics, you have centripetal convergence and centrifugal divergent forces, two forces of nature. There is expansion and contraction. Everything in nature breathes in and out in an ebb and flow. So the female energy, her essence is magnetic, as in Magdalene, as in magic. The root word of mag being female, magnetic. Her essence is water. It's cool, wet, moist, which is why she's associated with the cave, the caverns, the dark hole that leads to the underworld, to the abyss, into the ground where caves go. This is a segment from Sonia Bonacci. From the earliest conception of man, the sacred egg represented the origin of life and the secret of being. In the ancient Greek Orphic tradition, it was known that the universe originated from within the silver cosmic Orphic egg. This particular egg is depicted with a serpent coiled around it, much in the same way that DNA is tightly coiled around the histone molecules called the chromatin within the chromosomes of a human somatic cell. As the image illustrates, the core of a nucleosome consists of 8 protein molecules, called histones. This 8 bead-on-bead-like structure is the exact same geometry as the star tetrahedron known as the Merkaba, also the seed of life, known as the Star of David, in two-dimensional form of the same geometry, which is the cube. The creator god, which emanated from the waters of the Orphic egg, was both male and female, dualistic in nature, just as the Star of David, or the hexagram, consists of two tetrahedrons of opposite polarity spiraling into each other. So again, as I've covered, these are the two polarities, the male and the female. The hexagram, which is correspondingly the sexagram. It is the male triangle, upward fire, corresponding to the female element, water, downward triangle, downward tetrahedron. And these two tetrahedrons, these two polar vortexes, these vortices, they intersect and they create the magnetism of all life. It is the structure and the fundamental foundation of this universe. It's how everything in this universe works, electromagnetically, through these twin vortices. It was believed that this winged god created all the other gods as above, just as the nucleosomes are entwined within the genetic blueprint required for the creation of so below, here on Earth, which corresponds to the Egyptian deity called Neph, or Kneph, which was also depicted as the winged egg. Looking at the ancient mythological and spiritual teachings of cosmology, we clearly understand we're all about and inspired by the cycles and movements of the heavens and planetary bodies above. With the aid of the electron microscope, we're now able to delve deeper within the intracellular structures of the human cell, and perhaps come to understand how these stories are reflected within the physiological processes of the human body, what we coin as astrophysiology. And again, it's the divine nature, this is the divine wisdom of the human temple. All of these myths, these stories, and these archetypes are referring directly to the anatomy and the physiology of the human body, of the temple, the inner temple. Darkness is universally perceived as evil simply because the darkness is associated with all things representing death and unconsciousness. In other words, the nighttime, when the sunlight goes away and it dies, when all the monsters come out, when the nocturnal predators would come out and threaten the very survival of primordial man around the campfire. This is why the light is perceived as good and the darkness is perceived as evil, because the darkness is the very basic human survival mechanism. where the predators, the nocturnal predators, come out and prey upon man. Because he's not an apex predator. So yeah, because man is not a carnivore. He's not an apex predator by nature, by evolution. We've developed tools to consider ourselves apex predators, but in nature we are not apex predators. So this aspect of the fear of the dark is the very root of all human fear, especially fear of the dark. It's the unconscious nature within us that is the very aspect and essence of fear, which is why we perceive things as dark and darkness as evil, and thus why the feminine is perceived as evil, why the feminine was always perceived as a demon. And a demon is related to the dark nighttime, is related to the female goddess. This is why the female goddess has been demonized.
The downward decline of descent into the demonic realm of the underworld, which is the degrade, the decline of the season. When the summer declines, it dies into the winter season. So obviously it's not all of these dark, black, shadowy aspects are nothing to fear. I mean, that's what they want us, is to be afraid of the dark, to be afraid of the underworld, where all the secrets are kept.
Yes, and the word dark, what means? D and arc. D is like a pyramid, if we would see at the letter how it looks like, and which has a fire in the middle, because pyramid is fire in the middle, and we have arc. So it means we have the fire in the middle, the pyramid, which opens that arc. So through darkness we can go and see light, because we have the opposite.
Of course, the light shines into the dark, and that's what gives birth to life, is that spark.
Is that spark. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that letter D is also as a prism, because when light goes through the prism, we have the other 7 spectrum of the other colors. So it's actually saying that the word dark, it really is the opening of the gates of the arc, or with the colors of the prism.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, I was thinking about that, and I wrote something down a while back, how that spirit, that light descends into the water or matter, and from there on binds to earth through water, right? Then ascends again and sets the matter free and takes the water. Now your body is almost 80% water, so the fiery spirit must go through the air, which is mind, to water, matter, which is the body. So that's the interconnected sexual divine unity of male and female that it passes through on its way to the Red Sea, the blood, to manifest in matter. So there it is, through love, through that unity, the fire descends into the matter, water body. And just look at the alphabet from A to Z, from head to toe. If you line up the alphabet on the 26 letters from head to toe, it works that way too. In German, our word for toe is C, which is Z-E-H. Head to toe, the Z, from A to Z, same thing. And if you lined it up on the body, the alphabet, you get A-B at the top, to M-N in the middle, and that spells abdomen. Right, from ab to M-N, abdomen.
That reminds me of the Ab being the Ab being the father, and obviously the Ab being the father is also the head, or Aries, which is the Abba. It's the Abraham, the ram, the ram of which is Aries, the head. So that's why the Ab, the A and the B would of course be at the head.
And then down to the toe, where the water, your body connects to the earth, soil, where you're grounded.
And this gets me thinking about the way that male-dominated patriarchal Christian society, which has always been underlied by the female matriarchy, but it's just been covered up. The matriarchal goddess worship has been taken over by the patriarchal god worship. In other words, the phallic worship of all the obelisks and the tower. So everyone knows that the obelisk is obviously a phallic symbol. But so again, everyone knows that the obelisk is a phallic symbol. But there's obviously more to it as well. Anywhere you find the phallic sex magic, you find the symbol of the goddess as well. You find the penis penetrating the goddess vagina, the goddess yoni. So of course you're going to see that everywhere as well, such as Washington, D.C. and the Vatican. Anywhere you find the obelisk, you also find it penetrating the feminine as well. So there's obviously a dualistic nature to it. It's not just the phallic worship. It is a sex magic ritual. It is the union, the divine connection between heaven and earth. The skyscrapers, the phallic tower. All of these towers, these obelisks, they're literally they're radio antennas. If you compare the electrical science to the obelisk with the radio antenna, they're identical. Same with caduceus. These are radio electrical antennas. The darkness is associated with the death of the season, the death of the annual year. In winter, when the sun dies at its lowest point of the annual year. It's all related to the zodiac. It's all related to as above, so below, regarding human physical anatomy and human sexuality, and the physics of nature. The Uraeus serpent worn on the ancient Egyptian pharaoh's third eye represents the ancient Egyptian depiction of the goddess Wajat, who was the serpent goddess. Wajat comes from Widget, meaning green one. And green, the color green, represents fertility. It represents the fertility of springtime, the renewal, the rebirth, as in the serpent, the green serpent, the rebirth, and the re-emergence. As the oldest deity and the patron goddess of the Egyptian pantheon, she was associated with the land and depicted as a snake-headed woman, or a snake, usually an Egyptian cobra. The ancients observed how the snake moves in the most sacred manner of any creature on this planet. It moves in undulations, in ebbs and flows, in a sine wave pattern, just as the wave fields of physics and mathematics, holding all the wisdom and the knowledge of the universe in its simple fluid motion. The fluidity, the fluid dynamics of the wave, the sine wave. Walter Russell said that the secret of the universe lies in the wave.
And remember when I showed you a demonstration a few days ago of the fact, now we're looking at the plane of inertia along this magnet, which is right down the center. It's not located there, but it's a pressure field mediation, which you can't cut it out. You can never cut out North Pole or South Pole. I explained this in great detail a few days ago. Okay, it's a plane of inertia. What happens is, over a greater spatial difference, the pressure mediation, and this is a string, this is too long for the dielectric inertia plane to sit at the center. If I take 2 or 3 magnets, let me take off 2 of them here and put them down. Okay? If I just take 2 of these, the plane of inertia will sit right there in the middle. You can see it, right? Well, that's all well and fine. But with too great of a spatial distance, let's just say this is a longitudinal transmission here. This is really long. The plane of inertia can't sit at the middle here because there is too much spatial phase between this end and this end. So it cannot exist as a plane of inertia. Mother Nature works by simplex pressure mediation. So how does Mother Nature distribute, and I talked about this the other day, distribute the plane of inertia when the plane of inertia is too huge, i.e. a longitudinal transmission like this? As I showed you, if you're able to look up close, and you can buy a set of these if you want, these are just like 2mm cube neodymium iron borons. It distributes itself in a double helix and a vortex, exactly like, except this time it is inverse to light. Now the circuit of light, listen closely here. You better damn pay attention closely here, okay? In regular light, light is a coaxial circuit. We have transverse electrical and magnetic and a longitudinal plane of dielectric pulses. Actually, excuse me, the pulses are right here, where the electrical and magnetic are at their null point, okay? And with increasing frequency, like blue light, towards the blue end of the spectrum, we have more pulses, which is why we have, this is also the explanation for the photoelectric effect, which Einstein won a Nobel Prize for, but he made correct observations but incorrect conclusions. This is why we have more units of power on, like, say, blue light, okay, as opposed to red light. We could say this is red light and this is blue light. Okay, well, that's fine. We have transverse electrical and magnetic field perturbations resultant to the longitudinal dielectric pulses which exist here. The longitudinal, this is a coaxial circuit. You know what a coax cable looks like, right? You know, it has an outer sheathing of copper and a central conductor core. Coaxial circuit. Light is a coaxial circuit. We have electrical and magnetic transverse, okay? And we have longitudinal dielectric pulses, which occur here. Okay, now these are the power. By the way, this little thing right here is what the idiots of quantum mechanics and general relativity called das Lichtwand, or what the common idiot calls a photon. There's no such damn BS as a photon. It doesn't exist. It is a misunderstanding of a dielectric pulse, okay? Misunderstanding, big time misunderstanding. So, what does this have to do with high power? Not just power transmission wirelessly, we can do that. But high power, high directionality, non-lossy, meaning it's not, you spray out a water hose, water goes left, right, goes all over the damn place, right? A lot of it, you shoot out 100% of it, but only 10% of it reaches the target at the end, right? Okay, lossy. Some people are like, what are you talking about when you mean lossy? It means you shoot out 100%, but only 10% reaches your target. What we have here is, by creating a helicoil of the plane of inertia around an electrical longitudinal pulse perturbation, and I am in direct contact with the person that I've seen demonstrate. They're not on YouTube, sorry, no. Now when you're seeking a patent and you made a huge discovery, you're not going to post videos on YouTube. You have a longitudinal electric. So now, at every transverse, we have the dielectric in a double helix, or the plane of inertia, that is corkscrewing around a pulse perturbation. And so what we're able to have is the holy grail of all humanity, that which, let me make a point here, the holy grail of what everybody's been scoffing at Nikola Tesla. Oh, that's not possible. No, that's not possible. The holy grail of what Nikola Tesla said was possible. And we said, no, it's not possible. Well, it is possible. Longitudinal wireless high voltage transmission. Here's the real holy grail in actuality. At least this is what my buddy calls it. Wireless high voltage transmission.
So in other words, this is why the serpent represents the tree of knowledge. This is why the snake is always associated with wisdom and knowledge, and why the snake portrayed this knowledge and the wisdom to mankind, just as Prometheus stole the fire from the gods and gave the fire to mankind, to humankind. The fire, the eternal flame of the mind, and gave the enlightenment to mankind. This is why the serpent is always demonized, because the royal elites, the ruling basilisk, these royal bloodlines did not want the masses, or them asses, to gain the wisdom and the knowledge of the human physiology, because that would lead to their enlightenment and their freedom and their sovereignty. Ruling classes do not want that, so therefore the way you do that is you demonize, you take nature from the masses and you demonize it. You tell them that it's evil. You tell them that their bodies are evil, that the wisdom and the knowledge of the human physiology and the knowledge of all the universe is evil. You keep them away from it through fear. You tell them to fear it at all costs. Therefore, they will never awaken. They will never have knowledge. That is how you control humanity, is through the control of knowledge and wisdom.
What we are trying to do is return the focus of attention to individual experience. We have been slave too long to ideology transmitted hierarchically and based on a tremendously alienating instrumentality. That's what science depends on now, a tremendously alienating instrumentality. What we need to do is empower experience, because it's misbehaving. Misbehaving is a great sin. In fact, it's enshrined as the first sin. You'll regard that the psychedelic issue was there in Eden, and somebody misbehaved, and then they got tossed out forever, and their children's children, into the chaos of history. It's interesting to read in Genesis why this was. It was because they will become as we are, says Yahweh. They will become as we are if they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. I suggest to you that this is precisely what we should seek to do, and that this we is the voice of hierarchy, the voice of paternalism, the voice of the male ego finally right up into the storm god, the volcano god who lies back there in the origins of monotheism. We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity. It's a wonderful thing to learn to be able to stand up and yell bullshit. I did it when I was about 18 years old, and it was the meme of the hour, and it blew their minds. It did blow their minds. It was uncivil. It was uncivil. It lacked polity. It was rude and crude and correct. Correct. Because so much is being slung, and nobody is talking about the primacy of experience and the dignity of the individual. The dignity of the individual. We went a long way with this in America before we betrayed it. And it wasn't only betrayed by the clowns in Washington, it's also betrayed by anybody who clusters themselves around the feet of some self-proclaimed nabob. Because the fact of the matter is, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies, you may be sure of it. And so to pretend that one human being will lead another out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth is ludicrous, absolutely grotesque. a product of this empowering of the human image that has gone on through several thousand years of dominator culture. If you want a teacher, try a waterfall, or a mushroom, or a mountain wilderness, or a storm-pounded seashore. This is where the action is. It's not back in the hive. It's not in the anthill. It's not knocking your head against the floor in front of somebody who claims that because of their lineage and whose feet they washed and whose feet they washed, that you should give credence to them. Knowledge is provisional, and we are yet to approach even the first moment of civilized understanding. The way it is to be done is by trusting yourself, trusting your intuition. Reject authority. Authority is a lie and an abomination. Authority will lead you into ruin. It's not real. And it isn't, don't get the idea that it's this liberal rap about how everybody has a piece of the action. You know, the Jews know something, the Buddhists know something, the Huichol know something. Nonsense. Rubbish. Nobody knows anything. These are different kinds of shell games that have been worked out by priestly castes of people to keep things under control. Institutions seek to maximize control, control, control. That's what they're into. Did you think they were in the business of enlightening you? Saving your soul? Forget it. Control is what this is all about. And to the degree that we commit ourselves to ideology, we are poisoned. Any ideology, Marxism, Catholicism, objectivism, you name it, rubbish, all rubbish. What is real is experience. What is real is this moment. And so then what it becomes about is, what are the frontiers of experience? How much of that has been taken away from us by these dominators, by these priesthoods, by these cults, by these philosophical shell games? Well, a lot. That's the whole story of history. Our growing unease, our growing dis-ease, our malaise is all about the fact that we are kept from the wellspring of experience. We are sexually repressed. You may not feel it, but look back 100 years to a world where pianos wore pants. You know, we've made a little progress on the sexual thing. Maybe not. Maybe more or less than we think. But we are repressed in all of these areas. And we are particularly repressed in the area that relates to experience, because it is raid to the dominator insect invasion. They can't take it. They can't stand it, because it empowers the individual. It dissolves the cheerful model of science. It's just exposed as, a nice story. It enriches the accessible universe tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. It makes the individual complete within his or herself, and this completion of the individual is extremely destructive to the plan of the dominators, which is that you will be a cog in a machine. You will participate in the life of an organization, not your life, the life of an organization. You will go to some bullshit job, you will pour the best years of your life and your genius and your hopes into this. You will serve an institution. You will serve. Well, it's a bad idea for free people to go along with this. A much better idea would be to insist on the dignity of human beings, to recognize that the freeing of slaves, the giving of the vote to women, the ending of public whippings, that this program of political enlightenment must also then include hands off on how people want to relate to changing their minds. We are not interested in being sexually regulated by the state, and we are not interested in being intellectually, spiritually, emotionally manipulated by the state. The state should stand down. The state is acting as the enforcing arm of the dominator culture, specifically of fundamentalist screwballs who, are horrified by all this, by the notion that people would claim the authenticity of their own minds, that people would stand in the light of nature and reject original sin and the guilt from Eden and, the sins of the fathers and all this rubbish which is handed down. What the archaic revival is going to have to mean, if it has teeth, is a re-empowering of the individual and a consequent lowering of the profile of institutions, especially government. We need to think about these things because we have bought into the idea that we have to serve and behave and be enslaved, else chaos will engulf the world. I don't know how many of you have ever had the privilege of being in a society in a pre-revolutionary situation, but the cafes stay open all night, and there's music in the streets, and you can breathe it, you can feel it, and you know what is happening. The dominator is being pushed. It never succeeds. It never is able to claim itself. But on the other hand, history is young. We may have a crack at this. If we continue as we have, then we're doomed. And the judgment of some higher power on that will be, they didn't even struggle. They went to the boxcars with their suitcases and they didn't even struggle. This is too nightmarish to contemplate. We're talking about the fate of a whole planet. Why are people so polite? Why are they so patient? Why are they so forgiving of gangsterism and betrayal? It's very difficult to understand. I believe it's because the dominator culture is increasingly more and more sophisticated in its perfection of subliminal mechanisms of control. And I don't mean anything grandiose and paranoid. I just mean that through press releases and sound bites and the enforced idiocy of television, the drama of a dying world has been turned into a soap opera for most people. And they don't understand that it's their story, and that they will eat it in the final act if somewhere between here and the final act they don't stand up on their hind legs and howl. And it's not done through organizing, it's not done through vanguard parties or cadres of intellectual elites. It's done through just walking away from all of that. Claiming your identity, claiming your vision, your being, your intuition, and then acting from that without regret, cleanly, without regret.
So the serpent is also found in the trees, where the sacred fruit which bears life and nourishment for all the animals is found. And this is why the snake could be perceived as the guardian of the fruit of life, the fruit which humankind evolved developing knowledge and wisdom was from eating the fruits of the tree, the juicy fruits of Mother Nature, the fruits of life, which this planet is a garden where the fruit trees grew all around in tropical regions, very temperate, very moderate climate, where the fruit was abundant, and the fruit is the most dense, is the most nutrient dense and most nourishing food on the face of this planet. It's the simplest food to digest. It is the ideal food of humankind. And I have covered this extremely in depth in my articles because it's the simple sugars that are easily digestible, instant energy, passes right through us, cleanses the body, the most highly detoxifying food that we can put in our bodies. If you want to detox your body, eat fruit. It is the fruit of life. This is why the snake is found in the tree with the fruits and guarding the fruit of life. The fruits, the seed of knowledge and wisdom. When we look at the etymology of the word snake, we go to the ancient Hebraic roots for the word snake. The Edenic word is she-nake. Pronunciation, she-nake. In other words, she-nake. Serpent goddess. It's a feminine word. The Chinese word she is snake. Recalls nikush, meaning divination or magic. Snake magic is all about the creature's neurology, as I've already covered. Snake handling has long been associated with magic, from snake charmers in Bombay, India, to medicine men among the Native Americans. Modern medicine men still uses the symbol of the serpent and the pole, the Asclepius, the snake and the pole, just like Moses and his snake and his staff. In other words, his phallic pole, and his serpent, which the serpent represents the goddess. From ancient Greek, the Pythia, Python, which is why today we still find the serpent goddess dancing with her phallic pole. The pole represents the male, where the snake represents the goddess, the female. So the snake represents both the male and the female, the Kundalini serpents, the Ida and the Pingala, which wrap around the Sushumna, or in other words, the midline of the human body, the midline that falls directly between the bilateral symmetry of the human body. Snake is from Anglo-Saxon snaka, or esnaga. Snaga, Sanskrit meaning serpent, the Nagas. And in the spiritual teachings, we have the two Kundalini serpents which intertwine, the Ida and the Pingala, the male and the female energies, which intertwine up the body, which are red, the colors of red and blue, which the red and the blue, when they converge at the middle, makes the purple, which is the unification of red and blue. And the red and blue relating human anatomy is what we call the venous system, or the Venus system, as in goddess system, as well as the arterial system, or the atrial system. So we have the venous system and the arterial system, which is red, and the venous system is blue. The arterial system relates to the color red, which relates to the god Mars. In other words, the male phallic energy, the sword. And the Venus system relates to the goddess Venus, which is the color green. In other words, the fertility, the springtime, the renewal, the rebirth. Because the Venus system is what the arterial system delivers the oxygen to the organs, through the blood. It's what delivers the oxygen to the cells. And the venous system, it's what excretes the carbon dioxide out of the cells. The goddess Venus is born from the ocean, from the seashell, which the ocean obviously is blue, the sacre bleu. Veins which carry the blood once it's low on oxygen look bluish green, but that's because of the tissue that makes up the veins, and it's not due to the blood itself. It's due to the wavelength of light that we see when viewed through the skin. There's the term, although blue-blooded, which especially in previous eras used to refer to someone who was of royal or noble class, or noble bloodlines. So if your family was rich or notable, people may have said that you were of blue blood. In other words, this often relates to the term cold-blooded, as in these royal classes were often tyrants and often very sick people, very disgusting individuals, and so hence they lacked empathy. They were sociopaths, and so hence they lacked the emotional capacity of the mammalian complex of the brain in order to feel empathy. So in other words, they operate from the lowest portion of the brain, which is survival and dominance, which is the reptilian portion of the brain, hence the term cold-blooded or blue-blooded, as in cold, blue, blue-blooded. Despite these things, nobody's blood has ever actually been blue. The red color of blood is because the cells contain tiny amounts of iron, heme iron, which is contained in a molecule called hemoglobin, which you may have heard of. Iron turns red when it combines with oxygen, or in other words, it oxidizes. Just like when a piece of metal rusts, it turns a reddish orange. It's also the color of Mars, which is the red planet, for exactly the same reason. The dirt on Mars contains a lot of iron, hence Iron Man, which is the color red, hence red Ares, bloody Mars, god of war. Some animals, though, use a different mechanism to transport oxygen. Instead of using iron, the element of Mars, they use copper, which is the alchemical element of Venus. Copper also binds to oxygen, so copper oxidizes a bluish green, and so animals that use copper to transport oxygen have blue blood. Most notably, arthropods, such as lobsters, arachnids as spiders, and snails, have blue blood. And if you notice the previous etymology that I just did on the etymology of snake, the root word of snake being sneg links to snail, and even the Lithuanian word snake means snail, hence the link between snail and snake and the blue blood, cold-blooded. So that relates to the red and the blue Kundalini serpents, the male and the female energies in the human body, the arterial and the venous system. So all of this leads us directly into the anatomy of as above, so below the waist, so below the belt. The correspondence of the sexual organs to what is below the belt to what is above the belt. Again, the pineal gland is the only gland in the one of the only glands in the human body, and it's the only gland in the human head that is unpaired, or in other words, it's asymmetrical. It's azygous, meaning it falls at the direct midline of the bilateral symmetry of the human form. So the only other organs in the human body that fall directly at the direct midline of the human bilateral symmetry is first the pineal gland, then you have the thyroid gland, then you have the thymus gland, and the only other gland that falls directly at the midline of the Sushumna, the third pillar of the human body, is the penile gland, or the female clitoris, directly azygously, asymmetrically in the midline of the human body. And now I'm going to cover the direct connections between the pineal gland and the penile glands, female clitoris and the male glands.
And I'd figure we'll start at the top, basically at the top of the anatomy, to again link what I was describing, again the connection between the pineal gland and the penile glands, as we can obviously see the geometric similarity as well as the obvious symbolic similarity, the same representation, as well as what we can see here at the base of the thalamus. We can see that is where the pineal gland is located, and at the base of the penile glands is where we find the penile frenulum, which in the female anatomy, right here at the base of the glands, of the frenulum of the glands, would be the clitoris. In the female anatomy, what would be called the frenulum clitoridis. And again, as I had just mentioned, how the pineal gland is one of the only azygous glands within the human body, again following the direct midline down the center of the human body, or the Sushumna, the midline, the third pillar of the human body, in the direct center of the bilateral symmetry of the left and right halves of the body. So again, one of the only other glands that falls along that midline is, you go all the way down, you've got the thyroid, the thymus, and then in the male anatomy, it goes down to the penile glands, is the only other gland in the male body that falls at the direct midline of the human body. And that corresponds in the female to the clitoris and the uterus. And again, I mentioned previously in the video about the pineal gland and the brainstem, or the pons and the medulla, as well as the thalamus, corresponding to a snake, corresponding to the Uraeus serpent of ancient Egyptian symbolism. And again, the pineal gland being the parietal eye, the snake eye, the eye of the snake, the one-eyed, the all-seeing eye, the one-eyed snake. which again directly corresponds to the penile glands, as well as this looks exactly like the clitoris in the female anatomy. And again, at the frenulum is exactly where the female clitoris would be located. So it's interesting, again, we have the Uraeus serpent, and it's funny how the male serpent, or the male penis, the male snake, excretes something called urea, which is the main component of urine. So you have the Uraeus serpent and the urea, which comes out of the male snake. But again, what corresponds to the male also corresponds directly to the female. So again, I just showed a slide with the markings on its hood, which obviously resembles a penis, but what most don't immediately recognize is that it also directly corresponds with the female uterus and the ovaries. So again, what corresponds with the male is exactly correspondent to the female as well. Because again, as I showed just a minute ago, both of the genitalia are exactly the same. There is no difference, other than the uterus, which is correspondent to the prostate. But again, the male anatomy is exactly correspondent to the female. And what we're looking at here is as above, so below the belt. We're looking at the sphenoid bone, which, again, if you missed my last video series about the symbols of power, the monarch symbolism, regarding the Moloch owl, the butterfly, and the bat symbolism of the sphenoid bone, go back and see that video, or else you won't know what I'm talking about here. So we're looking at the sphenoid bone, and as above, so below the belt. We're looking at the pelvis compared to the sphenoid bone, and we can see the obvious correspondence here. And what I failed to mention, I believe, in my last video, was this point right here, letter D, is actually what is called the vaginal process. So again, the vaginal process is located directly in the center point of the sphenoid bone. And in the pelvis, we would have the vaginal process would sit at the exact corresponding point. And notice you can even see the two different bone structures also have similar foramen in corresponding locations. And I found this image, surprisingly, as I was actually looking for the Vesica Pisces to relate to this innermost chamber here in the brain as well, to relate it to how certain segments of the fornix here directly correspond geometrically to the vagina, as well as the pineal relating to the clitoris. And I'll show that geometry here in a second. But what we can see is the Vesica Pisces here related to the geometry of a butterfly. So again, the Vesica Pisces relating to the innermost chamber here, the first, second, and third ventricles of the optic thalamus. And here, as I was just mentioning, we can see, again, which I mentioned was the innermost chamber, the fornix, the third ventricle, as well as the first and second ventricles of the optic thalamus. So this is an image that I found quite a while ago of a CT scan of the human brain is what we're looking at here. And as soon as I saw this, I immediately made a mental connection of the geometry that I was looking at. And what I immediately saw was how the Vesica Pisces fits here within the two hemispheres of the human brain, making up the geometry of this third ventricle, which falls direct midline of the bilateral symmetry of the human body. And so what we're looking at directly corresponds to the female vagina, or in other words, here we can see the prepuce right here of the clitoris, and here would be the clitoral frenulum, the frenulum clitoridis, which, as we can see, directly corresponds with the brain. Here we've got the two branches, which would be either the bulb of the vestibule or the two major labia, the labia majora, the two lips of the vagina, and again the frenulum of the clitoris, the frenulum clitoridis here at the top, which joins the two. And yet again, as I was just describing, we can see the obvious geometric similarities and the correspondences between what is as above to what is below within the female anatomy. And again, as I was mentioning, we can see the similarities. You have the clitoris and the frenulum clitoridis, the body of the clitoris, within the human brain as well, as we can see the exact same corresponding geometry. And again, the vesica piscis making up the two hemispheres of the human brain, or at least the third ventricle within the human brain, the optic thalamus region, the ophthalmos, the all-seeing eye within the human body.
I was wondering if maybe you wanted to get together. I know there's a lot of stuff I'd like to say.
Whispering eye.
So if you get a chance, give me a call back and we can see each other. I'd love to see you.
And our whispering eye.
And your whispering eye. All right. Bye. Whispering eye.
It means vagina. It means vagina.
It's a classy move, man.
It means vagina.
Yeah. Get your whispering eye in the cab, Ozzy.
Where he mentions the vagina, a reference to the vagina, and he calls it a whispering eye. And it's a funny little joke there, but again, you have the all-seeing eye within the human body. And so, as is obviously apparent, as we know, is that the female anatomy has two sets of lips. You've got the lower lips, the labia majora, as well as the labia minora, and then you've got the obvious two lips of the mouth. And as I was just mentioning, within the optic thalamus region of the brain, I was mentioning again the frenulum clitoridis, as we could see in the human brain, and here we are looking at the correspondence between the tongue, and this image is flipped upside down to mirror the image of the frenulum clitoridis, which would actually be this invisible section right here on the outside, just beneath the clitoris right here. But again, we're seeing what is called the lingual frenulum. In other words, the lingual, etymologically linked to tongue, as in from Latin lingua, relating to the tongue. And again, I mentioned the female anatomy having two sets of lips, which refers to the word labia, which means lips, which the root word of lab. As I said, the female has two sets of lips. We all know that the male has two heads, as above, so below the belt. So again, as I was just mentioning, here we have an image of the developing human anatomy, of the human sexual anatomy, and what we're looking at again is the similarity between the male and the female, which, again, this is the prepuce, or in other words, what corresponds in religion to this is the Virgin Mary's, this is her hood. And just beneath that we have the glans clitoridis, which is the clitoris.
Hey there, little Red Riding Hood. You sure are looking good. You're everything big bad wolf would want. Little Red Riding Hood. I'd like to hold you if I could, but you might think I'm a big bad wolf, so I won't. Hey there, little Red Riding Hood.
What for this you have? What for this you have?
Look at that flesh, pink and one up. Hello, little girl. This one's especially lush, delicious. Hello, little girl. What's your rush? You're missing all the flowers. For hours, take your time. That's straight ahead, not delay or be misled. So little girl, hark and hush. The birds are singing sweetly. You'll miss the verse completely. You're traveling so fleetly. Grandmother first, then Miss Plump. What is an accidental couple? I'll take profession, one Brit, one supper, 100. Come on, may follow the path that never strays. Just so little girl. Any path. So many worth exploring. Just one would be so boring. Look what you're ignoring. Think of those crisp, aging bones. Then something fresh on the palate. Think of that scrumptious carnality twice in one day. There's no possible way to describe what you feel when you're talking to your meal.
Mary's, this is her hood. And just beneath that we have the glans clitoridis, which is the clitoris. The glans, the male glans, is correspondent to the female clitoris. Basically, how we'll see that every human starts off as female. The female genitalia becomes male over time, but we all start off as female. So we're looking at the similarity between the two genitalia. And what we're looking at is the progression over time of the different genitalias between the male and the female. So we're seeing that they have the exact same anatomy. And I was mentioning the vesica piscis in the human brain, and again how it corresponds to the clitoris here geometrically in the vesica piscis, where the clitoris is located in the vesica piscis, and that also corresponds to the male anatomy. Here is, obviously I couldn't find an adequate graphic to portray what I'm talking about, so I just drew this simple image of what we're looking at is actually the male glans. We're looking at the male penis head, which holds the same geometry of the vesica piscis as well. But so we're looking at how the male anatomy also follows the same sacred geometry, the vesica piscis, same as the female vagina. And again, same as within the human brain. So both the male and the female both correspond to as above, so below the belt. And since we're on the male anatomy corresponding to the human brain, as above, so below the belt, here what we're looking at is the pituitary gland, which hangs down from the hypothalamus area. And as we're looking at this, it basically needs no explanation, although I'm here explaining it anyways. The similarity between the male genitalia and as above, so below the belt. The pituitary gland and the male testicles. So as above, so below the belt. Again, one of the only glands that falls at the direct midline of the human brain, and again, one of the only organs that falls at the direct midline of the human anatomy. And I mentioned how the female anatomy, the female has two sets of lips, the labia majora of the vagina as well as the lips of the mouth. So she's got what we like to joke about is her vertical smile as well as her horizontal smile. So the two lips, the labia. And here we're looking at the as above, so below the belt in the male anatomy, and what we know as the lingual frenulum, as well as the lingam frenulum, the penis, the penile frenulum. So again, as above, so below the belt. And when we get into the linguistics and the etymology of the lingam, again, the ling refers to the phallic. The lingual, comes from Latin lingua. Is in language we have what's called the labial, meaning referring to the lips, as in a labial stop, which is a complete closure of the lips during speech. during discourse. When we look up the etymology of language, from language, the etymology of the root word lang or lang actually means long. When we look up language, which refers to the tongue, the linguistics, from the Latin lingua, of the tongue, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European root of ding, meaning tongue. And this is the root word ding, the root sound, the root phonetic sound ding, as in the ding-a-ling, as in the male lingam, so the tongue as it corresponds to the penis, the lingam and the lingua, the tongue and the penis. So we have the lingam and the lingua. And the root word of tongue, again, comes from Proto-Indo-European ding. So the ding-a-ling. The ding-a-ling. The penis and the tongue. Which brings us to the root word of ling, of longeer. Of lingual is longeer, to lick, to use the tongue, to lick. Longeer, or pronounced, could alternately be pronounced lingerie. And the secular etymology of lingerie refers to linen, but when we look at the lingerie, it's actually the long, thin string, or in other words, the ling, which, when you look up etymologically of ling, refers to things that are long, and as in a penis, the male, the phallic, it's the male aspect. So this brings us back to the cunnilingus, using the tongue, is a compound word of cunny or cunnus, vulva. When you refer to a cunny, is known as the Playboy bunny, which is the fertility of the bunny. The female bunny refers to the cunny. The rabbit, synonym for cunny, which comes from cunt, which is where we get the sexy fertility Playboy bunny, the female bunny. So Latin cunnus, or vulva, the cunt, and to lick, longeer, cunnilingus, to lick the cunt. And this is why a cunning linguist is always best at cunnilingus. As I said, the female has two sets of lips. We all know that the male has two heads.
So this is called the diencephalon, and it's referred to as the cephalic portion of the brain, relating to the diencephalon, which etymologically comes from cephalic, pertaining to the head, from Latin cephalicus, from cephalikos, pertaining to the head. Cephalic contains the word phallic within it. Cephalic, pertaining to the head.
As above, so below the belt. This is an image that I compiled. What we're looking at is the muscles of the perineum, or in other words, we're looking at the pelvic muscles of the genitalia. We're looking at the genitalia muscles. And this is the female, this is the male, which obviously have an almost exact corresponding muscle structure.
Okay, I got a kick out of this. You're gonna love this. So, I was just covering out the urogenital triangle combined with the anal triangle, and the muscles, perineum, the perineal muscles, are exactly the figure 8 shape. They are the lemniscate, the lemniscus, which the lemniscus is a bundle of nerve endings, which is why it's in the shape of the lemniscate. And the lemniscate, again, is the figure 8 form. And so I got a kick out of this because the lemniscate, the figure 8, is also what's known as the analemma. So I mentioned earlier what we're looking at are called technically, medically called the perineal muscles. but you can easily alternately pronounce that the perineal muscles. And this is no coincidence, and this is no mistake. And as I'm showing you here, there is a direct link between the muscle's shape as the lemniscus, or in other words, the analema, and the analema again covers the cycle of the perennial year. It's the path of the sun throughout the year. The perineal muscles, the perennial muscles. So this is no coincidence. This is astrophysiology at its finest. So it's the analema is the path that the sun takes throughout the year. So I had always been wondering previously why it's called an analema. Up again after seeing that the anal triangle, the muscles of the perineus, and the sphincter muscles are literally the analema shape, that gave it a whole new meaning. And from Latin analema, the pedestal of the sundial. From Greek analema, prop, support. But it gets interesting when we get to the roots of the word. In other words, from ana, meaning upward. In other words, to lift up. And lambani, to take. So analema literally means to take up. And as I just showed you, the symbol of the Ouroboros, the Leviathan, the lemniscate, the serpent eating its own tail. And this makes me think, it's funny, analema, the Ouroboros, the snake, the serpent, takes us to astrolabe. And the astrolabe is from medieval Latin, astrolabium. And I find this interesting because, again, as we've already covered, labium means lips. Astrolabe is linked to the analema, and it's related to taking up, it's a star-taking instrument. Lemma is something received or taken. So what about the anal triangle and the sphincter muscle relates to something received or taken? In other words, to take up. The anal lemma. And I know this is very crude, but it's also very interesting and very crude and very humorous, but very interesting nonetheless. So I think that this definitely went off track, but I had to put this in there because it's interesting. Oh yeah, and so when we look up anal, just to confirm this, from Latin analis, of the anus. The anus is the inferior opening of the alimentary canal. From Old French, anus. From Latin anus, meaning a ring, anus. From ano, ring, as in analema. So called for its shape, compare Greek dactylios, anus, literally ring for the finger. Dactylos, finger. The dactyl means finger, hand. So the anus is literally the ring for your finger. So I think that,
it's obvious to see the correspondence between the muscle structure of the perineum and how it directly relates to the human form. In other words, I guess you could say this is the larger fractal of what is within. As within, so without. We've got the human structure right here within the human genitalia. And this is why the human sexuality and the sexual organs are so sacred. And we can see the similarities of this here is the gluteus maximus muscle, so in other words, it's the butt muscle, and it's in the exact corresponding spot as you sit in meditation or yoga, you sit on your gluteus maximus. And we can see the similarities here, the similar shape between the hands, which when we look deeper into the symbolism of the hands, that is actually the vesica piscis, as I just mentioned, which corresponds to the female anatomy, which corresponds to the female sexuality. Which, if we go in even deeper into the anatomy, corresponds to the Virgin Mary. And in the anatomy, we have the hood, which forms the labia minora. Again, this is what's called the prepuce, the clitoral prepuce, and the hood of the Virgin Mary. And again, the praying hands referring to the goddess, the female anatomy, the female goddess aspect. And again, as I mentioned, with the hands, the position of the hands. And what I'm pointing at here is actually the sphincter muscles, which again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the sphincter, which relates to sphinx, comes from etymological roots of sphinx, meaning to asphyxiate, meaning to strangle. It's the strangler, because the muscles constrict, or they strangle. So again, these muscles contract, because that's a feminine energy, is contraction. In physics, the contraction is the centripetal convergence, where things contract, they go inward. So this is a constricting, contracting energy. And again, we're looking at the similarity of the hands, the hand position regarding the female anatomy. And this is why people like Angela Merkel always show you the hands, the sacred vagina, the sacred goddess, the feminine aspect. What she's showing you is the matriarchy. She is showing you the power of the goddess, which it is the matriarchy that holds power behind the patriarchy. The hidden hand is always the goddess behind the patriarchy. It always will be that way. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, everyone knows that the matriarch is always behind the patriarch. Always will be. She controls reproduction. She controls genetic lineage. She controls how the bloodlines will be passed down. Everyone knows that when the female is not happy, the male will not be happy. The goddess has the ultimate say.
So again, as I've covered throughout this video, is I've included the symbolism of the Masonic arch, or the Royal Arch, as well as the obvious Freemasonic compass, the square and the compass, which is the main, most prominent logo or symbol for Freemasonry. And this is the deepest truth, and you won't find this from anyone. You won't find this anywhere else. You're not going to get this truth from these so-called pseudo-fake Christian YouTubers such as Mario the Vigilant Christian, KJ Osborne of Scariest Movie Ever, not Truth Red Pill Revolution, Truth Media Revolution. None of these people are going to tell you. They don't have no idea as to what any of these symbols actually mean, as to what the all-seeing, this is the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. Absolutely clueless. What we're looking at is known as the urogenital triangle, or in other words, the as above, so below reflection that is shown in so much esoteric artwork that it's ridiculous. And this is what no one else is going to tell you, is that, as you can see here, we have in the Masonic compass, which draws feminine curves or arcs, you have the arch, or the keystone of the arch, which represents the clitoris, as well as you have the legs of the entire body of the clitoris, making up what's known as the urogenital triangle. And then we have the square down below, which draws phallic straight lines. In other words, it draws angles. And the V is the ruler, and that corresponds to what is known as the anal triangle, which consists of the perineal muscles which attach to the pubic archway, the pubic arch. And in the center we have the gateway, or in other words, the vaginal gateway, from which all life emerges, from the darkness of the womb, the cosmic womb, from which we emerge from a separate realm into this realm. All life is born out of the darkness, comes through the gateway. And the men of Freemasonry wear a feminine apron with the Masonic logo of the vagina, right over covering their vagina because they don't want to get the cement onto their vagina. So when you actually want to know what the real all-seeing eye in the pyramid of the Illuminati, the symbol, is all about, all you need to do is look to the human body, which is what it's all about. And this is what none of the Christian YouTubers or the Christian, so-called fake Christian truthers are going to tell you, because they have no clue. They have no idea what they're talking about. So here is your all-seeing eye of Lucifer, your truncated pyramid, with the all-seeing eye in the middle. This is what it's all about, because you get to the innermost muscles of the perineum, and you have the deep transverse perennius. And again, this is the pubic archway. Stedman's medical dictionary describes the innermost layer of the brain as tender mother. The innermost layer, the pia mater, which is Latin, again, tender mother, is a thin, delicate membrane that inspired some early neuroanatomists with a poetical bent to compare the way this membrane envelops the brain to the gentleness of a mother caressing her infant. Note again, the medical dictionary refers to this inner part of the brain as a mother caressing her infant. Does this begin to make sense to you as to who the Virgin Mother is? The outermost layer of the brain matter is called the dura mater, meaning tough mother, and the inner layer, the pia mater, the tender mother, between the two lies a reticulated layer of tissue called the arachnoid, whose appearance reminded one of a spider's web. Arachnoid, the web, the curtain, the veil. It's in the brain, separating the outer from the inner, just as the temple veil separates the inner from the outer. Arachnoid literally in Latin means old spider mother. The Native Americans have legends of Spider Grandmother, who is the creator of heaven, who wove the web of the stars. Just as in our neuroanatomy we have the web woven of neural connections, just as in the universe we have the web of neural connections within the mind of the universe. So again, we've covered the meanings of sacred, sacral, as well as the sacral energies, the sacred sacral energies, which revolve around sex, impulse, urges, survival, and the sacral regions, in other words, the sacred sexual regions, the reproductive glands, are also where we find the sacred secretions, the secretions of the sacred hormones. Hormone comes from hormone, meaning urge, impulse, instinct. In other words, our first most basic urges. The words secrete and secret are etymologically linked. The secrete, the secretions, the sacred secretions, the sacred secret. So again, this links directly the connections between the sacral region, the sexual regions, and the pineal gland, as well as the pituitary gland in the brain, which also produce the sacred secret, the secretions of the hormones, of the hormone, the urge, the impulse. So again, this directly links the as above, so below the belt. As within the brain, so below the belt. And again, the fornix and the pia mater, or in other words, the vault of heaven, and the tender mother, and her vault within the brain, the vesica piscis. So the chrism, the Christ, sits within the vesica piscis, the tender mother, in the arms of the pia mater, of the tender mother. And within the brain, the word Christ comes from Latin and Greek chrism, Christos, or oil,
And these are all of these are the holy anointing oils. They are the sacred secretion. And the Pia Mater, the tender mother, actually produces 70% of the body of the cerebrospinal fluid. In other words, the Pia Mater, the tender mother, literally produces the Christ. The Pia Mater literally produces the chrism, the cerebrospinal fluid, the holy, the sacred oil, the anointing oil. Christ is the anointed one. And you anoint something by anointing it with the sacred fluid, the milk, the cream. This is why you have to get down on your knees to receive the sacred cream, to receive the fluid onto your head, to get anointed with the sacred fluid, with the cream, the milk, the oil, to the land of milk and honey. What's the only substance that is sticky like honey, the consistency of honey, and is the color of milk? What is the only substance? It's the sacred secretion. It is the semen, from where we get the words like seminary, seminal. Seminary literally means a breeding ground, from seminarius, meaning of seed, literally from semen. The genitive is seminis, seed. The semen, the seed. The cum, meaning with or together. Meaning school for training priests, commonly used for any school, but especially academies for young ladies. Literally a breeding ground. And this is why in the Catholic churches, this is why we find the pedophilia. This is why they're always associated with the children and the sex scandals, the pedophilia, the sex trafficking. Most religious terminology and symbology is rooted and stems from the seed or the seminal, literally from the seed of ancient fertility rites, rites of passage, and sex. Because the sacral regions are where the most nerve endings in the body are located. And this is why when you have an orgasm, you have a godly experience. You have a communion with God. A cum-union, with Latin root word cum, does indeed connect etymologically to sex. Latin cum meaning with or together. And the only way that you come is you come with or you come together as one. You become one with God. You come together with your sexual partner. Sure, you can do it individually, but it comes from together. It comes from two, being together or multiple. So it does link etymologically with the word come. And so when you graduate with honors or cum laude, you are indeed graduating or being anointed
with the benefits. You are receiving the benefits. You're receiving the blessing. You're reaping the fruits of your labor. Just as the child is the fruit of the woman's labor. You're being anointed with the benefits. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe with the button down below. That way you can receive updates for each video that I make. And if you enjoy it, make sure to like it and go ahead and leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think.